We've talked a lot about the basics of Kundalini, but how do we awaken it? So this divine feminine force, this pure creative potential, is just waiting to be awakened at the base of the spine. So through spiritual effort like yoga, meditation, qigong, kriya, deep inner work, etc., Kundalini begins to stir. This means that through spiritual effort, this Kundalini awakening is really already started to occur. But as it awakens, this energy rises up the spine, activating and purifying each of the chakras along its path, like a serpent uncoiling and ascending towards the crown. This is kind of what we've been touching upon with all the chakra systems. And so you do not force Kundalini upwards, you prepare the body, the temple, and it rises naturally. This is one of the things I think most people often overlooked. Especially in a lot of these Western ideas of Kundalini and awakening the Kundalini, they're really trying to just force this energy up, which is really not how it works. This is how you can get into, spiritual psychosis really well, how you can burn your third eye, and how you can have an unpleasant Kundalini awakening experience is by trying to force it. But really what you want to do is just clear the body, clear the channels, clear the chakras, and the Kundalini will naturally rise once the temple is clean, once the body is clean. Another huge part about awakening Kundalini is to talk about sexual energy, because sexual energy is creative energy, is the spiritual currency for Shakti to use. So in Kundalini traditions, this energy can be redirected upwards for transformation. This is talked a lot about in the tantric traditions, as well as in traditional Chinese medicine traditions, which we won't really get into more in depth in this video, but it will be crucial to learn, especially after a Kundalini awakening and during the process of a Kundalini awakening, really understanding this energy moving up the spine. So when unconscious, it seeks only release, but when conscious, it can become fuel for awakening. So this is really crucial, understanding that you can kind of see sexual energy as spiritual currency for Shakti. As this creative energy, this sexual energy, which can create life, something that we have no idea scientifically how to understand that truly, Shakti, when used consciously and not unconsciously, can kind of use that sexual energy in a way to move herself upwards and start dissolving these illusions. So the more conscious you use your sexual energy, the better for this transformation. This is why it's very common for men. We talk about sexual retention a lot. Let's look at this image on the right first, where it shows the turning the wheels. This is from traditional Chinese medicine with the dantians, the lower, middle, and upper, as well as the sexual energy at the bottom. As the wheel of energy turns, it moves up through the microcosmic orbit, up the spine, and also back down, and creating this vortex, which we'll talk about later in this video, and the importance of this. This is also called the Kundalini circuit. Let's go to this image to the left, this golden state of preservation of energy for men. This is also from traditional Chinese medicine. I think this is a really important one, especially for men, to talk about, especially when we talk about Kundalini energy, because when we talk about semen retention, a lot of times we just talk hey, just stop, ejaculating, stop releasing. But we have to understand that we are also going through sexual cycles, kind of just in a different way, but in a natural cycle like the women have with their menstrual cycle. And so depending on the age, this is a generalization of the interval between ejaculations that should occur, but depending on the age of the men, this is kind of the general days of the cycle that occurs. And so this is not to release every 4 days if you're in the age range of 20 to 30, but really every 4 days you should learn to use your sexual energy and move it up the spine without releasing it outwards. There's a lot of practices that you can learn. We won't really touch upon them in this presentation, but stuff like microcosmic orbit is a really good one. The bandhas is a really essential one. and other kriyas are very great ways to move this energy and not have it ejaculate. So the last thing I want to touch upon this is we can kind of look at unconscious release as the same way we see animal reproducing. Like when you're in nature and you see an animal reproduce, you don't really have any qualms with that happening, the natural process happening. And it should be kind of the same way when you talk about releasing externally in ejaculation. There's nothing wrong with it. It's just a different level of consciousness being played out. And so you can kind of think of it as like third density consciousness versus fourth density consciousness, which is using sexual energy more consciously. You can still create babies in fourth density consciousness. We still want to participate in this world, but using it consciously rather than unconsciously, seeking for lust and these pleasures rather than co-creating some experience for higher conscious awakenings are two completely different scales when it comes to the sexual energy use. And also, it is also very, with this whole Kundalini awakening, there are a lot of texts, as there's two paths in Tantra, one that involves a lot of sexual activity and one that does not. And the path with a lot of sexual activity talks a lot about how sexual transmutation really helps energy release and expand consciousness and helps the Kundalini energy move. So signs of awakenings. So physical symptoms can really feel like energy or heat moving through the spine, especially in that snake-like pattern. Tingling or vibration in the body, sometimes this somatic release. Pressure in the head, forehead, or the crown, and changes in sleep patterns. Heightened sensitivity to light, sounds, and other senses is huge. And surges of energy or fatigue, especially with these die-offs, fatigue can be common. Really touching upon that somatic release, you'll see a lot of times when talked about Kundalini awakenings or you're doing these certain breath works and stuff, you see these people's bodies shaking, vigorously. This is what I kind of mean by somatic release, is that energy is being poured out into the system to really transmute energy, to awaken a lot of dead spots in the body, unconscious spots in the body. And so you'll have a lot of these somatic releases. It's like the shedding of the skin of the snake happening in the body. Emotional symptoms can be like old emotions surfacing to be released, sudden crying or laughter, increased empathy and sensitivity, periods of fear or anxiety, deep peace or bliss states. I mean, you're going to go through all the emotions, all the bliss. When you're going through a Kundalini awakening, you must transmute and really dissolve all illusions and feel all emotions to have this awakening. So the emotional symptoms will be a very wide range of experience, but very heightened is the key word for that. Mental symptoms can be the expanded awareness, heightened intuition, increased clarity or insight, the feeling of detaching from old identities, and the desire for truth and authenticity. So more signs of this awakening would be the increasing of synchronicities. So this is like meaningful coincidences, feeling guided by life, and right people lessons appear at key times. So like a common one is like seeing angel numbers appear more frequently, or really just seeing synchronicities appear more and more often until really synchronicities are every moment. You kind of just see every moment as a miracle because it truly is. Inner silence, natural stillness is huge. Less mental noise and peace without external reason. I mean, you can't really separate all this Kundalini awakening with meditation. And so really getting into that meditative state more frequently, more common, is another great sign of an awakening. And then heart opening is another huge one. I mean, we're talking about moving from third density to fourth density, from solar plexus to heart chakra. So having an activated heart, an opened heart is huge. So this is increased compassion, spontaneous love for others, great empathy and forgiveness, and feeling connected to life. I think one of my favorite little stories that kind of show this is from Ram Dass, where he talks about, after really coming to these realizations and awakenings, you're walking down the street and you see someone and you're just so fully, unconditionally in love with that person, even though you've never met them. And you just want to know everything about them. You want to talk to them forever. You're just getting really intimate with this person, but, life's going on. They got to go. They're done. They got something to go do. They walk past and you're like, wow, you could have spent a lifetime with them. And then 2 seconds later, you walk by someone else and you kind of have that same interaction, and you're just so unconditionally in love with reality, with everything around you. Purpose activation is another huge one when it comes to Kundalini awakening. So this is the desire to serve, needing to create something meaningful, and stronger pull towards your dharma and your path. A lot of times before a Kundalini awakening, you're kind of still stuck in that spiritual seeking experience. You don't really know which direction to go and to push towards. And one of the huge things about Kundalini awakening is, even if you don't realize all these symptoms beforehand, if you have found your dharma, your path, your purpose, it's a very strong sign that you've had your Kundalini awakening. And so the Kundalini awakening process can really help you towards your dharma, towards figuring out your dharma, and towards the path you want to take in your life. Desiring to serve is huge. I mean, we're talking about there's two real splits in consciousness and duality, and it's service to self and service to others. And so when you're really talking about this whole Kundalini awakening process, it's really this desire to serve others, this service to others. Well, it can get very paradoxical quickly in this metaphysical world, because serving others is serving yourself. It's really, are you aligned with the ego and the ideas of separation, or are you aligned with life, unity, and the service to others? So another few of these energetic signs of awakening is inner conjunction. This energetic lightning bolt that happens in the body is really balancing the masculine and feminine energies. The granties, which are energetic knots being released, so old fears surfacing and dissolving, emotional knots unraveling, identity attachments weakening, and sudden clarity after inner tension. And then the piercing of the cosmic egg, also the feeling of the crown chakra opening, which is really just this breaking through the illusion of separation, consciousness expanding beyond personal identity. Before we go more in depth about some of this energetic signs and some of this Kundalini awakening experience, we really have to go and talk about the dark night of the soul and die-offs. This is a really huge experience in the Kundalini awakening. First, we'll talk about dark night of the soul. So the hero's journey always travels through the underworld. This is an archetypical experience for all people on the spiritual path, the hero's journey. So I have a picture of Odysseus in Hades. This is from the story, the Odyssey. It's just a representation of how all the epics, all the hero's journeys, they always travel into the underworld, into hell, and before they become the better hero afterwards. And so most people really go through this depressive, this harsh time in their life before they have a spiritual awakening or a Kundalini awakening. This is very archetypically true. Everyone I've talked to always kind of has this case, and if they didn't have it quite like this, they were probably stuck in a very egotistical mindset right before their spiritual awakening. And so another great metaphor for this is that the tree that reaches for heaven must have its roots in hell. This is a great metaphor that really explains stuff like the macrocosm is the microcosm, but also this whole dark night of the soul, as you kind of need to have your roots in hell. You need to see the depths of hell so that you can reach for the heights of heaven. And, we're not just raising our vibration, we're expanding our consciousness. So you gotta have to experience both. This is why bliss is any emotion fully felt. Another huge concept that we really need to talk about when we're talking about Kundalini awakenings is die-offs. So a die-off is when old identities are being stripped away. This can occur throughout the whole Kundalini awakening experience. This can occur when the energy really drops, when energy can feel really low. This may appear as endings, setbacks, purging, depression, trauma activation, or internal chaos. And so we really want to manage our energy properly so that we do not have die-offs. And this doesn't not mean that your Kundalini awakening is done or like you've failed of any sort, but this is a common occurrence when you are in a Kundalini awakening experience. And so we'll touch upon how to manage the whole Kundalini awakening experience so that we can prevent die-offs. But know that if it does happen, it's just temporary and you're just really stripping away these old identities. And really be grateful that Shakti is moving through you and that you can have these identities be stripped away so you can be more of your true self.